So next of all, we're going to hear from Steve Botham, who I work with on Gather Movement. So I've got two hats today. One hat is I'm the director of Share Jesus, and one is I'm kind of joint CEO of the Gather Movement. And Steve Botham's really helped with this resource on compiling some stories of what happens when churches work together. So over to you.
What happens when churches work together? All sorts of things can happen. I think one of the great privileges I have is almost to be like a reporter going, what is going on? And of course, we're in a time of the most incredible change. So what is going on now is different from what was going on 6 months ago. And even getting out and about into some of the different communities around me, I come from Birmingham. You can cheer if you like. Yeah, it's such a privilege. Where's Birmingham? Things are just springing up. And I think what God is doing is he's putting an innovation upon people who are praying for God to move. So there's an innovative spirit, if you like. And I think one of the key things at this moment is not what we say, but how good our questions are. This is a time when that word exploring is so important. Southampton have just done a fantastic piece of work where they brought all the churches and Christians together with the local council and the university, and they've said, what's going on in Southampton in terms of the cost of living? And they came up with some stats. In the past 12 months, they've seen a 39% increase in food poverty. They've also seen a 39% increase in fuel poverty. They've seen a 38% increase in council tax arrears, a 53% increase in private rental arrears, and a 29% increase of people threatened with homelessness. And you go, well, stats can wash over us. What we need to do is then get into what does that mean? What does that mean for the community around you? How many people are in more debt and in more distress than they were just 12 months ago? And of course, the answer is an increased amount of people. In Birmingham, we've been looking at a number of stats. 11.5% of people in Birmingham are unemployed, which is double the national rate. A lot of our young people feel they have no aspiration and no hope. What are the jobs? Where are we going to go to? There's a rise in mental health issues as people are driven by poverty, debt, and anxiety. People are not accessing benefits, and if they're not accessing benefits, they're not accessing some of the other things. And one of the key facts for us in Birmingham is we're the youngest city in Birmingham. We are the youngest city in Birmingham. We're the youngest city in Europe. Now, being the youngest city in Europe means there's something really strategic for us about our young people. So in a sense, knowing what's unique about you, knowing some of these stats, knowing some of these distinctives is really, really important. And what's springing up, I think one of the things I would like to see more of in 2023 is where groups are gathering together to go, what's best practice? What are some of the challenges we're facing? What are some of the things that are rising up? So if you look at some of the best practice that certainly we've been picking up, community hubs. There's an initiative that the government are doing on family hubs. 75 different councils are supporting family hubs. It's a growth. It's bringing families into a particular place. Churches are very much involved in that. Then there's the whole community hub issue. I went around 5 very different community hubs in Sandwell 10 days ago. Each of them had a different calling on them. Each of them was doing something that was really credible and practical and very, very good within their local community. Youth mental health. Such a rising issue. If you're not concerned about mental health issues in your young people, you're not looking carefully enough. This is a really big issue. Over 50s. In Coventry, they've got a lovely initiative for people who are in their over 50s because this is a high area for mental health and loneliness. But what they've found is if you put on an event, they won't come to it because they're isolated and lonely. They don't want to come into your building. So what are you going to do to reach out and create the bridges that will help get that support across? Church running, Andy was talking about walking clubs, running clubs, sporting things, helping people's mental health, helping build community, helping bring something that bring people in. That whole how do we create welcoming spaces, warm spaces is so important. And what's really interesting for me is that the attitude of the civic authorities has changed enormously. I was on a call a couple of days ago with somebody from the parliamentary faith committee, and they were saying what's happened over COVID is that the churches proved something to the local authorities. And what the feedback from local authorities were saying was, we never expected there'd be such kind people around. We never expected people to be able to move so quickly, so proactively. We didn't expect to see what the churches have done. And what we began to appreciate is that the churches were the first in and they'll be the last out of our communities. So there's a new dialogue that's opening up, not least because for many of our local authorities, they're saying, we don't know what to do. We haven't got the resources. Can somebody help us? There's an interesting change within health as well. I've been involved in working with our local integrated care board in Birmingham and Solihull. If you don't know what the integrated care board is, find out. It's a big, significant change in the way the NHS is structured, and a key part of their calling is to tackle health inequalities, which is a huge issue where I am. It may be a huge issue where you are. There's an incredible unfairness around health. But the other thing they're doing is they've got a call to better engage communities and say, what does a healthy community look like? What's your theology of a healthy community? And how does church fit into that? Because our local health boards are wanting to engage Christians and others in that. We would need to be there available for that. And so what we're seeing within Gather is two things. One is there are things happening at a city level. So citywide, there are conversations that are happening now, like the Southampton one, that are really important in terms of let us understand what's going on as well as we possibly can do so that we're giving a really good response. But the whole issue of collaboration is so important. Because if we look at all the challenges it faces, for most churches, they could be paralyzed by saying, we can't possibly do that. I was talking to somebody in Sandwell, and he'd just been in negotiations, conversations with a church which got less than 20 people. And he was talking about what the church does and how it could grow. And they're saying, there's just no way we can grow. We don't do anything. There's only 20 of us. And he started to unpack it a little bit more. He said, but what happens in your church? He says, actually, funnily enough, what we've got is we put on probably 2 funerals every week. You go, well, that's an interesting ministry. But at each of their funerals, they get 150 people. And they said, is that our call? Is that our call? Has God actually put before us all this time something which we haven't recognized? Which is our call is to be the place that soaks up the grief and brings in bereavement support and helps our community. There's a church in Northampton, small church, mainly people over 70, and they're saying, what can we do? We can't do things. We can't put on projects. We can't put on action events. They said, well, what we could do is we could be the catalyst that brings our community together for a conversation. So this small community, probably about 10 to 12,000 people, they put on the conversation where they invited in the local school, they invited in the local parks people, they invited in the local councillor, they invited in the local police officer, and they said, what's going on in our community? They had a 5D type conversation. And then out of that process, the community came back in larger numbers and said, what can we do in terms of action? And one of the things, Simon said is just so important, which is the community said, actually, what we want to deal with is parking. And the church would go, oh, we don't do parking. Other than sometimes we might contribute to it if there's a revival. But that was what the community was saying was a really big issue. And then there were others. And you go, the church did a fantastic job working with what it could do. And so two other things for us is, from Gather point of view, what we're wanting to do is to resource and support. We've got some material in place which will help cities to plan and to get focus and to work together in stronger unity. They're really important to create the sort of umbrella organisations that enable things to happen more effectively on the ground, that encourage that collaboration, that encourage that innovation, that give support to people who are on the front line. And the second thing I'd just say is really important. There's an old song, which I suspect I'm the only person old enough to have ever come across. And it's a folk song from the 1960s. And because you've been so good, I won't sing it to you. No, maybe I will. It goes, children, go where I send thee. How shall I send thee? I'm going to send you one by one. I won't go into the rest of the song. But nobody will have heard of it. There we are, I'm beyond contradiction. It's such an important principle. God is sending his people out to build kingdom. And the church has got to let them go. We've got to restructure the way we do church, because our church is happening in our communities, and it's happening in our workplaces, it's happening in our schools. And that's a key part of what we're called to do as Gather, that whole sending out. So we provide resources, we provide materials, we provide all sorts of support. The last thing I would say, I used to work as a leadership consultant and change consultant, work with lots of organizations. And the recurring message I would give to leaders is the key job of a leader is to give focus. Because when you give focus, people know what's expected of them and how they're going to follow you. And I pray that out of today, you'll feel that God's giving you a focus that you can take into your community. Thanks.